Hi all, I'm Dr. Sam Zaranovich from drsamz.com, and this is the second video in a series about tech neck. Tech neck, of course, being the tendency for our technology to pull our heads down and forward and the problems that can cause. So the first video you may have watched gave a couple of really quick, simple harm reduction strategies to help prevent some of the problems from tech neck. I want to talk a little bit more today about what some of those problems are and how they happen. So I want to start with just the musculoskeletal biomechanical issues. Those are sort of the most obvious from a chiropractic perspective for most people to be thinking about. And so the first thing I want to talk about is just when the head comes forward, and I'm going to give you an image to look at here. The further forward your head is in front of your shoulders, the heavier it effectively is, the more weight it puts into your neck, into your shoulders. All of the discs between your vertebra are bearing extra load. The muscles are working a lot harder. The ligaments and tendons all end up under a little extra tension. And so the head effectively weighs 2, even 3 times as much as it normally does. So I think that the musculoskeletal piece of this is pretty straightforward. It just leads to headaches and neck ache and back pain and a general feeling of fatigue from working really hard, from holding your head up all the time instead of letting it rest on top of the spine. So that's the musculoskeletal piece. The second piece I want to talk about as the neurological component. This one's a little bit harder to understand unless you understand the anatomy. So the spinal cord is the tail of your brain. Your skull protects your brain, and the spinal cord is protected by the spinal column. Makes sense. There are little anchor points for the spinal cord all the way along the spine that help it just float in place relative to the vertebrae. And if the head comes forward and the spine rounds, then just like pulling on a guitar string, the tension on the spinal cord increases. When the spinal cord is under tension, especially for prolonged periods of time, the brain starts to go into a really heightened stress state. It can start with an adrenaline hit that says, oh crap, something's wrong, we have to survive this, because this posture is associated with the fight-flight survival mode. But also because it is under tension, the spinal cord is constantly being stressed by that tension, and so the brain responds with a heightened stress response. So some of the symptoms of that heightened stress response can be things like difficulty concentrating, anxiety, depression, brain fog, feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated really easily, because your brain is already working on a heavy stress load just from the mechanical tension on the spinal cord. So the further forward your head goes, not only does it weigh more for your muscles and joints to work with, but it actually stresses out the spinal cord, which is the tail of the brain. And so it stresses your brain out, and so it gets really hard to think clearly and to feel like who you know yourself to be. The third thing I want to talk about is sort of a consequence of the second. When the spinal cord gets under tension, then all of the nerves of the spine have a little bit more tension on them as well. And so all of the organs that the nerves control and coordinate start to have some degree of dysfunction. The greater the level of tension on the spinal cord, the greater the likelihood of visceral or organic or gut problems. And so that can be things like absorption issues when you're eating. You have a hard time getting nutrients out of the food. It can be things like difficulty with digestion in general, gas, constipation, nausea, stuff like that. Anything in the guts that can go wrong when the spinal cord is under extra tension. It can even be harder to grasp things like erectile dysfunction or urinary difficulties, because those organs are controlled by the nerves that go to the brain, all of which travel up through the spinal column, and when the spinal cord is under tension, they're not working quite right. So I hope this helps round out some of the understanding. I'm going to keep making a couple more of these videos talking about more things you can do about it, and some more strategies for reducing the problems of tech neck and for solving it. So I hope this is helpful, and we'll see you soon.